I'll try to be brief because the main speaker after me is the one we all want to listen to. As Amit said in the beginning, that it's the young who have to set the agenda. I'm going to use the color of my hair to use that as a poetic license in this case. I have normally two hats to wear all the time. One is I was the Students' Union president, but I'm also a teacher now. So what I speak is probably going to be a combination of the two hats. I'll not take much time. I think when Modi came to power, there was this discourse which was before the election and post the election, which was made that basically there's a dichotomy between Modi, the Hindutva man, and Modi, the development man. And I think this discourse has somewhere gone down, even with the liberal sections, that what is happening today is happening because he has not been able to deliver on his development plan. So this is more like a backup thing that he has come up with, or his party has come up with. I want to first break that notion. I think these two things, there is no dichotomy between the two. And let me explain why, and then I'll come back to this point later. I think the idea of development that Narendra Modi represents is essentially, to give you an example, the best example of that is pet project Make in India. The idea of Make in India, the way, let's say if this growth were to be delivered the way he wants it to be delivered, or his party, is essentially an inequalizing development. It's an inequalizing growth process because it says that you would produce in India, sell abroad. For that, you would have to keep your wages low, you have to keep the wage costs low. And that wage cost can be kept low in two different ways. One, in which you keep the real wages low. The other, in which you can have introduction of capital, you can have productivity rise, and that can keep the costs of your goods low, which you can sell abroad. The typical Chinese model. That is what he had in mind, that is what he has been projecting. Such a growth model, by its very definition, the source of it is inequalizing. It creates space only for certain people, what we call the inequalizing growth trajectory, and it creates the possibility, and I think that is important, the possibility of a transformative us and them. Something which came up in a big way in the Occupy Wall Street movement, where you had an us, which was the 99%, and a them, which was 1%. This kind of a discourse is possible, and it comes out of that growth process when a crisis hits. But for such a growth process to continue, you want to subvert this us and them and replace it with a regressive us and them. And it is that this Modi government has been trying to do. What I want to say is that even in the presence of this growth, this is what it would have happened. To add to that, what you have today is Modi has not been able to deliver. And the question is, in the first 2 years, he has not been able to deliver. Maybe in the next 3 years, he would. And that will not happen for the simple reason that the entire premise of this growth trajectory itself is dependent on the fact that you would have global growth pick up sometime, and when it does, then we can replace China, so on and so forth. That is not going to happen. It hasn't happened. Nobody is predicting it, not even the IMF or the World Bank. And if that is not going to happen, the days that we see today, which is essentially without a growth, the Hindutva card that we see today is going to get worsened in the days to come. And the reflection of that we see, the symbolism of that is essentially coming out in the form of crass nationalism or jingoism, if that is a better word to use. Normally in history, and that is how it has panned out, that such jingoism has either led to a full-scale fascism or you've had wars. And I don't think it should be seen as an impossibility in the Indian case that in the 2019 elections, and war is orchestrated vis-a-vis one of the neighbors, and Modi being championing that, given the fact that he would not have delivered on the so-called Achhe Din. Added to that, and that's what my worrying thing is, I mean, gloom and doom, but still a possibility that a Donald Trump wins the US election. It's not a distant possibility. If you look at the voting pattern of the Republicans and the Democrats, there are certain primaries in which Donald Trump is getting more votes than Bernie Sanders and Clinton combined. So it is something which is still, even though a distant possibility, can be a possibility. And just imagine the world that it would be when you have a Modi here and a Donald Trump there. And that's a deadly concoction for disaster for the world. I think in this context, their us and them needs to be challenged by our us and them. And it is there that I think we have probably been missing certain things. In this us and them, if we put, let's say, them very categorically in the Indian context, it would be an upper class man, Brahmin, who would essentially come as the image of them if we really do the politics as we should. And the us in this case should actually be an expansive category where which represents the women, which represents the Dalit, which represents the working class, which represents the Muslims. All of that put together rather than as distinct categories fighting their own battles on their own. In fact, a great Dalit intellectual said in one of the seminars, I was just reading an interesting point he was making, that what the Communist Manifesto is to the capitalist world, the annihilation of caste is to caste India. And unless we combine these two things, we would not be able to defeat them in the machinations that you see today. I think as a faculty member of JNU and my experience as the JNU Students' Union President, what I see so remarkable about this struggle is the transition from Lal Salam to Jai Bhim Lal Salam. I think that is the epitome of this struggle, which Kanhaiya and the others, and you can see, I mean, we say that people who've gone to jail, when they come out, they give much better speeches than they do before that. All three of them who have come out as excellent speakers. Kanhaiya was always a very good speaker, but the other two you might have heard online, they were very good. And each one of them, if you look at their speeches carefully, and the discourse, I would come back to the discourse in a bit, this is something that they're hinting at. And I can already see the colors here when I entered the hall. The first thing that I noticed was a red and a blue. That is the future of resistance in our country. And I think it is precisely for this reason that you see such a huge attack on JNU today. It's not as if that JNU has never been attacked in the past. It has always been a thorn in the side of the ruling classes, whether the Congress or the BJP or any of these governments. But what has happened today, and this came out, somebody who Pramod Ranjan wrote in the Forward Press, that what has happened in JNU today in the last 7-8 years is something remarkably different from what it was earlier. The left discourse earlier was essentially, and as Professor Ajay Patnaik was also saying, that the discourse was limited both in terms of leadership and in terms of the ideas that were represented, did have an elite bias. I'm not saying I'm also of the same generation. I'm not saying it was elite politics, don't get me wrong. But I'm saying the ideas, the heroes who we represented were essentially of this particular kind. What has changed with the composition of the students in JNU is that the political discourse in JNU has really shifted. It's not the same as what it was when we were students. And that combination, if you have an intellectual base which challenges this Brahminical dominance, it is that combination which is the most difficult to resist. A left on the side is fine, it's not a huge force for the BJP to resist. An independent Dalit movement is not something that they would be worried about. An independent, let's say, secular movement they would not be worried about. But when all these movements come together intellectually, genuinely united, then that is something which is extremely difficult to defeat. And it is that they wanted to break. That thing has actually started, it's breathing its life. I think it's too premature for me to say that it has already come into being on, it's moving in that direction. So far, what I can say has happened in JNU is at best a common minimum program of all these different strands of thought. What I think is required is not a common minimum program if we want to push this idea further. What we need essentially is a genuine unity with a common idea. It's not simply just combining them and putting them in numbers and then we get something which is larger in number. It's not that. It's actually genuinely a combination, let's say, of putting it in words, the Communist Manifesto and the annihilation of caste. If we can genuinely do that through the thought process, because it is that which ultimately results in praxis, then we will be able to, and I think it is that that role that the young today have to play and probably throw up issues in front of us. I mean, I'm also considering myself as young. So possibly using these ideas to think more deeply, because this, I mean, in the traditions that we have been trained that there are certain primary contradictions and there are some which are not as primary, is itself divisive. I think no contradiction should be treated as primary. Each of these contradictions, whether on feminism, whether on caste, whether on class, they are as primary as the other, because not resolving one of them does not resolve the others as well. It has been shown in erstwhile socialist countries, it did not happen. You had those questions still persisting. Unless we change our theoretical discourse, I don't think we'll be able to change the praxis, and it will, all these movements would stand separate from each other. It is that which needs to be challenged, and I think it is a possibility. It's a possibility which these young students have posed before us, and this is something which should definitely be lapped up by the intellectuals, and including the students, because they are the future intellectuals, to be able to put such a resistance. Just a few words about this movement. Let me say that two words which came out of this movement, which I think has really inspired all of us. One, of course, was nationalism of our kind, and the other was Azadi. On both these issues, what the teachers did, I mean, not just the teachers and students did, but the teachers played some role in that, started two different series on it. One was nationalism, which, as you all know, there were about quite a few lectures, about 22 lectures on that, where we were trying to challenge the concept of regressive nationalism, or as Professor Prabhat Patnaik had said, the aggrandizing nationalism versus the nationalism of people over nation. Different concepts were discussed in that. I think those discussions that we had in JU probably were still defensive in nature, because we were trying to fight a battle that what your nationalism is, our nationalism is different from that. What we are starting from tomorrow is an offensive battle. It's a battle for what is unimaginable, a freedom which we can think of, which has not been written about. We are trying to call people and asking everybody to come for such programs where we are genuinely thinking about the ideas in terms of what a genuine freedom would be like. Not just enshrined in the Constitution, which is of course revolutionary, but something which is far more substantive. And I would just end with a few lines of Faiz Ahmad Faiz. I mean, all of you know about this poem, but the freedom that we are talking about I'm not trying to be JNU nationalist, but still, the freedom that we are talking about for the series that is to come can very well be captured in the following lines, that but the heart, the eye, and yet deeper heart, still ablaze for the beloved, their turmoil shines. In the lantern by the road, the flame is stalled for news. Did the morning breeze ever come? Where has it gone? Night weighs us down, it still weighs us down. नजात ए दिल ओ दिल की घड़ी नहीं आई, चलो चलो कि वो मंजिल अभी नहीं आई. Thank you.